is the Dynasty outlook right now of Drew Lock? This is a guy who's only crossed 20 points in a game twice this season, QB 29 overall on the season. A huge hype name here in preseason. When they draft Jerry Jeudy, they got Cortland Sutton. They got
Melvin Gordon
they signed here. Phillip Lindsay, Noah Fant.
KJ Hamler.
It's things look great. Quarterback 29. Matt, you talked about this earlier in the year about, hey, he's kind of reverted back to what we hated about what he did in college.
Right. No, I saw a lot of the same things, and I think it was like he was throwing like 30% or something like that while under pressure, and he was the most pressured quarterback in the entire league. So all these defensive coordinators are seeing the exact same thing that I think we saw pre-draft with Drew Lock. So where I feel like you jumped on board a little bit more, so you're in the bandwagon here for Drew Lock. I kind of stayed.
Couple games, he looked really good.
I stayed very on the outside.
Yeah,
did like what I saw towards the end of the year, but I wanted to make sure to see it for like another full year before I kind of bought into this player. And I feel like, I mean, personally, they gave him all the weapons that he needed to they gave him enough rope to hang himself this year, and I think he kind of has a little bit. So,
especially in a draft with potentially 6 first-round quarterbacks.
Exactly. John Elway is out there running the show. He knows what quarterbacking is supposed to look like, and I'm sure that he knows better than I that they need to look for another quarterback, in next year's draft.
Yeah, I'm just as worried as you are. It's a guy I don't have necessarily in any leagues. I've never been a huge believer in him as a player, and I think it was kind of one of those things where, and we all fall into the trap of putting situation over talent. Mm-hmm. And I think the situation looked really, really good. Right. Lots of young receivers. But the other thing I think that we kind of forgot is these are still all like first and second year players with the exception of Melvin Gordon. These are all really, really young guys. So to assume that they're all going to come in right away and perform, I think is also a little bit of a mistake. So is it necessarily like dead, closed, shut the door? No, he could still rebound. He could still make something of it and give himself enough to get a shot at the beginning of the year next year. But we've seen a trend more so with these GMs now where they have a much shorter leash on these guys. And it seems like the minute they don't think that they're the guy, they'll take. I mean, that's what happened in Arizona with Rosen and a lot of different situations. Dwayne Haskins is kind of in that same boat now. Absolutely. It looks like. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if that's what ends up happening with Drew Lock.
The financial commitment's not there anymore. Like they had to pay these guys $60 million up front, but they used to. Now they don't have to do that anymore. So it's easy for a GM to turn the page if they don't like what they're seeing.
And Drew Lock's a second-round pick, so the value is definitely not
even
there
lower
monetarily wise. Yep. For me personally, I'm kind of leaning towards if I'm in a super flex league, I'd be okay with paying a second-round pick for Drew Lock if I can get him. Like you mentioned, everybody else around him is still really young. I still envision this team giving him a chance in 21. Okay. I still think he's the starter in 2021. I think they look to bolster that defensive up a little bit better for them. They've suffered a ton of injuries. They have a lot of things go wrong there in Denver this year. So for me, I could see them saying, okay, yeah, Drew Lock, we gave him more weapons, but they're young weapons. And it's been a crazy year. You're losing Von Miller on defense, losing Cortland Sutton before the year even started, who is his number one receiver, who he had his best rapport with. His 2 new starters, Tim Patrick he had last year, who's filled in. He's a nice receiver, but he's like one of those really nice NFL receivers every team would want on their team. Like if you're a Denver Broncos fan,
third guy,
you like Tim Patrick a lot, most likely. We have him here in Cleveland. He's Rashard Higgins, essentially.
Right.
And so for me, you bring in his other weapons are a second-year tight end who takes usually 3 years to develop, 2 rookie receivers, one of them KJ Hamler, who was used sparingly at Penn State, coming here to try and be a starter here as well. So to me, I think it even be fair to Drew Lock, to him as a GM, I would give him 1 more year. So to me, it might be somewhat of a buy-in window to get him back healthy with a guy like Cortland Sutton, who's that big receiver, really good at the jump ball, which can help Drew Lock a little bit more too. And maybe work with him his offseason about being so panicky about seeing the grass blow too hard his way. So for me, I look at Drew Lock. I don't think it's over. The arrow is definitely pointing down at a very sharp angle on his stock, but I think young enough and the weapons around. I would still gamble a little bit off the weapons around him, and still off the end of his 21 tape or his 19 tape, where he looked okay, and he still showed some flashes this year of he could be an actual NFL quarterback. So will he ever be a QB1? No, but if he could be a mid-range QB2. Maybe. But at the same time in Superflex, my counter argument to myself would be, like you mentioned, there's 6 first-round rookie quarterbacks coming in next year. We have a lot of good young quarterbacks. I mean, just this year alone, we have Herbert, Burrow, and Tua. All 3 guys I would want in any Superflex league. And then now go these last couple of years of guys who've been playing really well that are young. I mean, Kyler Murray is my number 2 overall Dynasty quarterback in Superflex leagues.
And we also have a lot of quarterbacks that could potentially take jobs that are veterans that might not have a home, like Sam Darnold and Jameis Winston and different guys like that. So there is a lot of competition out there for quarterback jobs.